Welcome to AEDT 4120, Serious Gaming and Simulations, Week 6, Serious Games Design, video clip 4 of 4. I'm Professor Bill Kapralos, and over the next few minutes we'll continue our discussion on designing games as learning tools, and this is part 4 of 4. However, prior to doing so, here's the list of analysis questions for this particular video clip. Number 1. What does the term drill and kill refer to? Number 2. What are adaptive games? Number 3. How are serious games and entertainment games different with respect to the manner that feedback is presented? And finally, number 4. What is the difference between fact-oriented learning and goal-oriented learning? Understanding your content. When designing a serious game or a simulation, we need to consider the type of learning that we are trying to make happen, and we need to select our interactive processes for doing so. We'll start off with a quote from Ray Perez, a cognitive psychologist, open quote, "Learning doesn't happen incidentally. You have to set out to teach those specific skills," end quote. Whatever the subject, begin by looking generically at different types of learning content that you want to teach, and then determine the types of learning that are actually going to happen within your serious game or your simulation. Is it going to be learning knowledge or facts? Will it be skills-based? Will it be judgments, behaviors, theories, reasoning, process, procedures, creativity, language, systems, observation, or communication, or some combination of the above? The type of learning that you aim to achieve within your serious game or simulation will undoubtedly influence the type of game genre you choose. Let's take a look at some examples of types of learning and potential game styles. And these examples appear in the book Digital Game-Based Learning by Mark Prensky in 2001. When the content includes facts, so for example, laws, policies, product specifications, learning activities could include questions, memorization, association. And possible game styles could include game show competitions, flashcard type games, mnemonics, action games, and sports games. When the content includes skills, examples include interviewing, teaching, selling, running a machine, project management. Learning activities could include imitation, feedback, coaching, continuous practice, and increasing challenge. And possible game styles include persistent state games, role-play games, adventure games, and detective games. When the content includes judgment, for example, management decisions, timing, ethics, and hiring, learning activities could include reviewing cases, asking questions, making choices, feedback, and coaching. And possible game styles include role-play games, detective games, multiplayer interaction games, adventure games, strategy games. When the content includes behaviors, so for example, supervision, self-control, setting examples, learning activities could include imitation, feedback, coaching, practice. And possible game styles include role-playing games. When your content includes theories, so for example, marketing rationales, how people learn, learning activities could include logic, experimentation, and questioning. And possible game styles include open-ended simulation games, building games, construction games, reality testing games, and puzzles. When your content includes reasoning, examples include strategic and tactical thinking, quality analysis, auditing, strategy creation. Learning activities could include problems, examples, system analysis, and demonstration. And potential game styles include strategy games and adventure games. When your content includes process, so for example, auditing, strategy creation, learning activities could include system analysis and deconstruction and practice. And possible game styles include strategy games and adventure games. When your learning content includes procedures, for example, assembly, bank telling, legal, learning activities include imitation, practice, and play. And possible game styles could include timed games, reflex games, puzzles, and invention games. Finally, when your content includes language, for example, teaching a new language, examples include acronyms, foreign languages, business and professional jargon. Learning activities could include imitation, continuous practice, and immersion, and potential game styles include role-playing games, reflex games, flashcard games. Choosing your learning activities. For the learning part of game-based learning, one can employ many interactive activities and techniques that have been shown to work in both games and non-game forms of interactive learning. You should also invent and devise new interactive learning techniques as they are needed, and continuous addition of interactive activities and learning techniques to our repertoire will make game-based learning increasingly effective as time passes. And of course, you're free to modify and reuse these activities in other games that you may be developing. Practice and feedback. Computers are very good at presenting a series of problems or a list of questions and then keeping track statistically of how the user answers. For example, at various stages throughout your serious game or simulation, you may present the user with a series of multiple choice questions. Furthermore, you may have them perform a specific task at various points within the game. Such activities can be very useful, but when used poorly, so for example, when overused, they can lead to what's known as drill and kill. And it can become very boring and repetitive for the user. Such activities can also be used in the form of what's known as mini-games, or game within a game, where the player is presented with some problems or series of questions, and they can only proceed after answering those questions or solving those problems. Such activities essentially are a form of practice, and practice does have its place within game-based learning. And in the right context, practice is an excellent way of learning things that require plenty of repetitive practice. This is more acceptable within the advent of adaptive games that shift difficulty depending on user performance. So within an adaptive game, the level of difficulty presented to the user changes depending on their performance within the game. Learning by doing works well in game-based learning because doing is one of the things that computer and games are actually good at. We interact with them, and you can have the user do things continuously and repetitively if needed. And the common element within learning by doing is active participation and decision-making by the learner. In other words, you're letting the learner take control. Learning by doing is also related to learning from mistakes. And this is actually an important aspect of serious games and simulation, the ability to make mistakes without consequences. Users move towards their goal until they come to a failure point, and at that point they obtain feedback. Trial and error is inherent in video games, and it motivates the user to keep trying. It's important to note here that feedback is vital at these failure points, as it helps the user overcome their failures. A difference between video games and serious games is the manner in which the feedback is presented. In serious games, it is through some form of telling, where you explicitly tell the user their mistakes or what went wrong. Whereas in video games or entertainment games, it's through actions. Something happens. In other words, you're fighting the enemy and the enemy destroys you. Goal-oriented learning. Some interactive learning designers distinguish between what's known as fact-oriented learning, where you're learning about something, and goal-oriented learning, where you're learning to do something. Goal-oriented or goal-based learning is a concept that has been in games since the beginning. It's inherent in video games. In other words, you're learning to do something, whether it's save the princess or destroy your enemy. Goals are inherent in games. Goals in general are a key element of a game, and it's these goals, which the player usually considers worth reaching, that motivate the players to keep going even within the face of repeated failure. This brings us to the end of our discussion on designing games as learning tools. And I just want to point to the reference which describes the list of game styles or game genres depending on the learning activity. And this particular reference is by Mark Prensky, and the book is titled Digital Game-Based Learning, and it was published by McGraw-Hill in 2001. This also leads us to our list of analysis questions. For these two questions, assume that you are developing a serious game for total knee replacement surgical procedure training and education. That is, you are focusing on the cognitive aspects of the procedure. In other words, the steps and the tools involved at each step. Number 1, what game genre would you choose? Number 2, how would you incorporate the following? Practice and feedback, and learning from mistakes. This is the end of this video clip. Thank you.